find us here on the air, kicking up a fuss. Check out our new website at www.thebeeroclock.com. San Francisco, the 1980s. Operation Ivy gives two-tone ska an active voice in North America and then disbands quickly under mysterious circumstances. Members Tim Armstrong and Matt Freeman move on to form the highly successful band Rancid. But what about singer Jesse Michaels? Some say he lived in a cave deep in the California wilderness, subsisting on a meager diet of cave fungi and rats. Some say he went into an intense Buddhist trance, sitting cross-legged, cross-eyed, and ivy-ridden for 10 straight years. At any rate, he's back and running hard with his new outfit, Kamen Rider. Stay tuned tonight as Steve-O and Brian unravel the secrets of Jesse Michaels.
So today on the show we have Jesse Michaels of the late Operation Ivy and of the late Kamen Rider. How you doing, Jesse?
I'm good, thank you.
So I guess to the people who don't know you, would you be able to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. My name is Jesse Michaels. I'm a musician. I played in a couple bands. Both of them were underground music, not strictly punk rock, but associated with that scene. And these days I'm doing a lot of visual art.
What kind of visual art?
Well, I do oil painting and drawings. This is a progression from, I always did illustrations when I was in the punk scene, and I've sort of progressed to doing painting and things like that.
Do you do it just for your personal enjoyment, or simply do you sell them? Do you present them in galleries, or?
Well, as I said, I've just made this progression to more forms associated with fine art, and so first I'm getting material, just making pieces, and then eventually I hope to do shows and stuff like that, although I'm not at that stage yet.
How different do you find, as a method of communication, visual arts from music or writing, for example?
Well, I think each field has its own rules and its own limitations, and so it is different, but the creative process at the core is the same for all of them. So in other words, formally you have to work differently, certainly different from music because there's less collaboration, and different from writing because for me it's not as hard as writing. I think writing is unbelievably hard. But just being creative and trying to do something new is the same for all of them, I think.
Would you be able to express what that creative process is?
Well, it's hard to express, and I think that's why you have art, because you're trying to give form to something that is maybe exists just beneath the level of language, something a little bit more subconscious than literal terminology. A bit hard to put into words exactly, although I would say that one of the main components of the process is turning off your literal mind and giving way to something more instinctive. And the goal is always to create something beautiful, whatever, that your definition of beauty may be.
When it happens, can you recognize it? Or is it something that you recognize after it happened?
Well, in the case of painting, I can only speak from my own experience, but I know when I'm onto something, and I know when I'm doing something that's not so great. this isn't all. This doesn't always last. Sometimes you think you've done something good, and you look at it the next day, and it's garbage. But when you're really onto something, you know it. I feel.
What about within music?
Music is, music's sort of a whole different thing, only because there's so much collaboration involved. But I think it's also true. I mean, some of my most rewarding experiences in music have been in the practice studio when you're playing with friends, and you can really sense when you've got a good song, and it's a great feeling, very triumphant, and you feel like you're doing your job and something good in the world, even just at the stage of creation, and it's very exciting. And I think that's something that almost anybody in a band shares and would say is one of the main rewards of, being in a band, and one of the things that justifies all the difficulty of being in a band.
You never really expected the reception that you got from Operation Ivy. I mean, so many kids were literally turned on by the music that you guys have made.
Yeah, that was a big surprise. I mean, we really had fun when we were writing the songs. That process I just described, where you feel like, wow, this is good, and it's something. I don't mean to sound like I'm blowing our own horn, as they say. But we just had a lot of excitement in the practice space. So we knew we were doing something rewarding for ourselves. But yeah, the reaction was quite a surprise, especially since most of it happened after we broke up.
Can you go back to that? I mean, you were 19 years old when the band was happening. I mean,
18 for most of it, but yes.
Okay. So what was it like? You know what I mean? Like, was it just sheer excitement of just like being, a late teenager?
Well, it was a combination of excitement and then all the anxieties you experience as a teenager, which for me were a lot, and also hardship and difficulty. We got in a lot of fights. There was problems at times with shows, and it's not always easy. So it was a combination of the three. But because we had such a successful creative experience, most of my memories are quite good, even though there were tough times.
How different is that now? When you're doing visual arts or you're writing, this is a solo project. It's just you trying to express whatever it is you need to express. But within music, you have 4 people or however many people that need to express something communally.
Well, it's very different, and what you just described really hits it on the head. But there's also the factor that when you're 18, I speak generally, but really I mean for myself. When I was 18, what I was after was excitement and raw energy and catharsis and radical expression. And now what I'm after, it quite naturally, when I do these things, is something a little bit different, something a little bit more meditative, and so it's different. I mean, we were partying and playing rock and roll, and when you're doing a painting or something, it's a much quieter realm of work.
Is it a slow process, or is it something that you can just when you have it, you throw a painting in a few hours, or is it something that you work on day after day?
Well, I do. I approach it both ways, and sometimes it comes out really quick, and some days it's more of a meticulous, almost like being a craftsman, almost like building, a piece of furniture or house or something bit by bit. So whichever approach feels right, that's the one that I think the artists will generally go with.
Again, with the visual piece, is it something that usually comes from within your imagination or from something that you've seen? Are you more into abstract painting or more realistic?
Well, what I'm interested in is there's representational painting and purely abstract painting, and then there's stuff that's in between. And examples of artists that are in between is maybe like Paul Klee or Picasso or Matisse, where there's some abstraction but some representation, and I think that's the most exciting stuff, and that's what I try to do. Not that I'm at the level of those guys, but I take inspiration from that type of work.
What about the inspiration of your daily life? Like, what inspires you?
Well, what inspires me most for painting is looking at other art. And then the daily life is also very inspiring, but indirectly, because the stuff that comes out is kind of it can't come from anywhere but your own feelings and your own worldview. And that, of course, is influenced by everything. So everything's sort of distilled into it. But the most direct inspiration is if I see something that I think is cool, then I will immediately want to draw afterwards. Like if I go to a museum or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's the most direct, that's the thing that's really the spark. But of course, everything that happens influences it.
You have said in a previous interview that part of this creative urge came from the feeling of alienation and this kind of numbness to the modern world. Do you still feel that today?
Yeah, I really do. I think that we live in strange times, and I don't even know how to put it exactly in the words. And so that really inspires the drive to express it somehow. And music has been a part of that, and now the painting, even though the painting is much less, deliberately, it's less social commentary and politics and stuff like that, but it is the same drive, and it's a response to the world.
Punk rock at its root was mainly about communication. At least for me, it always has been that what really turned me on was that the band was at the same level as I was. They weren't on a stage and they were talking, and if I had something, I could talk back. How do you think that has changed with its popularity?
Well, the punk rock of today is much different, of course, from the old days. And even when I was doing it, that was much different. That was much different from the 70s. So it's been a progression, and I think these days there's a lot more shows that would be described as mainstream, where there's literally a barrier between the audience and the band. And also there's a lot more bands and people who are into it purely for entertainment and fashion. And I actually don't think there's anything wrong with that, but it's not the thing that excites me. What excites me is, a band like The Damned or Stiff Little Fingers or Black Flag, where you just feel this strange raw power, and it's the sound of something new being created right in front of you, and something that's a radical response to the world. That's what I think is exciting about punk. And these days, a lot of times, there's a lot of form, a lot of style, and less content, I feel.
Are there any bands that you think are still hitting it on the head today?
Well, yeah, and I should qualify what I said a second ago by saying that I am not well informed about today's punk, and I know that there's always great bands, and especially when there's a huge mainstream, that means there's an even bigger underground. So, although I don't know of many, I'm sure that there's bands doing really cool stuff. And also some of the more commercial bands, I like listening to them. So it's not necessarily to say that stuff is bad, but it's I think a little bit less exciting than at its inception. And that's true of everything that comes along. So,
what music really turns you on right now that makes your heart go thump thump?
Well, lately I've been listening to, oddly enough, classical and metal. So it's not like really the classical stuff. I just let it's pleasant, and then the metal was more like an adrenaline thing. So I haven't been listening to very deep music, but that's just what I'm into these.
Well, what kind of metal? Like what kind of bands?
Well,
like what's in your CD player?
Right now, actually, Iron Maiden. So nothing, nothing too earth-shatteringly original, but I like Iron Maiden and Slayer and the this band from Sweden, Arch Enemy, is pretty good. So, but again, I like a lot of different kinds of music. So that's just sort of the phase I'm in right now for some, weird reason. Who knows why.
Why did Operation Ivy break up?
Well, basically, we broke up because we grew apart. And what happened was there was a series of small problems and small arguments, and they accumulated, and it led to us realizing that we just had a different view of not only how to do a band, but life in general. We were just different people. And it took 2 years to figure that out. And, there was never any regret about the time we spent together, but at the same time, it just felt like the right time to move on.
Where was your view at the time? Where were you heading?
Well, I was heading more towards, I don't even remember all the conflicts that came up, but the stuff I wanted to do musically was a little bit more serious, a little bit heavier, and a little bit less pop. But then again, a lot of another time it might have been the opposite with those guys. So it was just sort of a general difference in seeing things. It was almost like if I thought A, someone else in the band would think B, and vice versa. We just sort of had rubbed the wrong way at times, and it felt like time to look for new horizons.
Then you kind of dropped out of the scene, and you went to study Buddhism.
That's right. I did. I got into Buddhism for several years. I still am into it, but only peripherally.
How did you study Buddhism?
Well, I got this book, which is called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryu Suzuki, and I thought it was a great book, and I thought this guy, who was a Japanese Zen teacher, put into words all these things that I had felt, even, and that I had connected with the punk rock experience. But he did it in a way that was very articulate and that spoke to me in a way that I'd never experienced before. So after reading this book, I just went to the Zen Center, which he had founded, and I ended up living there for about a year and practicing the meditation and studying Zen.
Can you go more into that, the relationship between maybe practicing Zen and the punk rock experience?
Well, the relationship in most cases isn't direct, but one of the things that I had always felt, and that that went into the lyrics of Op Ivy, was that a lot of the problems in the world happen because of people's fixation on their own viewpoints. That's not to say you shouldn't have individuality or you shouldn't have, a personality or a perspective or opinions, but people are so rigidly adherent to their own set of beliefs that it's impossible for them to coexist with others. And, this was touched on in a lot of the lyrics in Op Ivy, and it's expressed very lucidly in Zen. They're always talking about reducing attachment. Anyway, so it really spoke to me, and the Zen, method was a way of becoming less attached to small points of view, and a way of connecting with a larger wisdom, which was more open-ended.
What did you find the most difficult thing about practice?
Without a doubt, the most difficult thing for me was the physical posture. I'm 6 feet tall, and it's not comfortable for me to sit in a cross-legged position. And Japanese Zen is very, very about posture. That's one of the main components of it. So that really didn't work for me.
Do you still practice?
I do. I still practice meditation, and I don't do it cross-legged anymore. And in fact, I don't call myself a Buddhist, but I do like the practice, and the reasons I do it are the same as when I started many years ago.
How is music spiritual to you?
Well, music is spiritual because a lot of, I think, a lot of what people are looking for in spirituality is something that's transcendent. Even if they talk about daily life, which is great, no one should ever divorce themselves from the world around them, but people are often have an inner longing for something which speaks of a better world. And music puts you right there. When you're listening to a great band, it could be Beethoven or the Bad Brains or whatever. It takes you to what feels like a higher place, and there's tremendous beauty and clarity and wisdom within that experience. And it's not something you can put into words, and that's the spiritual part. It's beyond words. It's I wouldn't call it supernatural because that sounds too flighty, but it's definitely something that lifts you above daily life in a way that I think the soul needs.
Seems to me that why bands like Op Ivy and bands like Bad Brains and are so important to so many people is that they're real. I think part of being human is to find what real is, or what it means to be authentic. And there's something interesting that's happening in the world today, at least in the entertainment world, is reality TV shows.
Yeah.
And and this need for real, and then what came out of it is reality TV.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think that in the case of the reality TV, I find those shows to be probably the most despicable
Yeah.
and unbearable form of entertainment I've ever seen on TV, which is saying a lot because TV is almost always insulting. So they're definitely, but that being said, the need is authentic. I think you're right, and I think that those shows tap into that need in an extremely superficial way, but people are always looking for that. You're right, and I think that's definitely true with music, with punk rock. It just feels real in some way that's hard to put into words.
The Dalai Lama came to Canada, and his ideas that he was promoting while coming to Canada was the promotion of human values, and that open discourse would be a way of promoting creative resolution. As a singer and as somebody who needs to express, do you think that is possible? Do you think open discourse can change anything?
You mean just talking openly?
Yeah.
Well, I think it can. I think of equal importance, and this is not to counter that idea because I certainly think it can. Communication is very important. I think of equal importance is the intention of the individual. So open discourse can work provided that the individual has some kind of good intention. And those are the parameters. You need both sides, both elements. And this is not in conflict with what the Dalai Lama talks about because, if you read his writing, he talks about the precepts where before one even begins practice in his tradition, one has to sort of make a declaration of their intention to follow certain guidelines, not in a moralistic right and wrong sense, but just in a sense of striving to do something that's good. It's not a neutral practice. It's a belief in the possibility of something better. So I think if people can start with that belief and then enter into an open discourse, the possibilities are endless.
So are you saying that part of cultivating open discourse comes with intention? That for myself to communicate, what comes through first is my intention?
Well, yeah, and I guess to put it most simply, that before a person can be a good communicator, they kind of have to have their own house in order. They have to have some commitment to, basically doing something good in the world.
How do you express that in your daily life?
It's always a fine line because I don't believe in, the sanctimonious type of morality that we encounter in much of religion and what they call family values and so on, where there's this sort of saccharine goodness combined with condemnation and judgment of people that don't fall within the definition of that goodness. So I'm not into that, but at the same time, in my daily life, I generally try and align myself with the things that I see as being good. In other words, when I'm doing art, I try and do something that is uplifting in some way. It's not purely neutral. I think a lot of modern viewpoints and particularly postmodern viewpoints hinge around this idea that there is no absolute right and wrong, and that everything is relative, and so on. Now, the opposite of that relativism is, too preachy, moralistic right and wrong, but you don't want to fall into total nihilism either. I hope I'm making myself clear. I'm sort of rambling. But anyway, basically, I try and align myself with what's good without being preachy or judgmental.
What about just expressing with your family and friends, just outside of art now, just communicating?
Well, this is actually very important because for me, insofar as I strive to do something useful for the world. And by the way, I'm certainly not positioning myself as some kind of great moral advocate or something, but I do have certain beliefs about just trying to be decent. And a lot of the way that I try and do that is just having good manners and treating the people around me well. Whether or not I'm successful at that is up to other people to judge, but it's something I try to do.
How important do you give to politics? And is there a link between spirituality and politics?
Well, I think that politics are very important in the world. I'm not sure if that's good, because politics basically tend to boil down to people struggling for power. I think that any activity can be spiritual if it's held in the right way. So politics can be a spiritual practice. I mean, if you take someone like Gandhi or Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela, then clearly there's a connection there. That's not usually the case in politics, but it can be.
In one way, we can't get out of politics. I mean, we are communal creatures, and we can't, in some ways, we have to interact within a society. And today, a lot of things are getting quite crazy. Just in the last week, what is happening in the Iraqi prisons with the American army is quite despicable. What do you feel about that?
Well, I have very clear feelings about that, which is that actually, and without turning this into a political lecture, I don't think that what has happened in those prisons is remarkable. The only difference is that now there's photographs. I think that the United States has done this consistently for 200 years. And, the unfortunate thing is that it's being presented as a surprise or a revelation or something that's different, when in fact the United States has created killing fields all over the world. In this case, one thing that you aren't seeing in the news is that they have private contractors, that means basically corporations, which are in charge of gathering intelligence, among other things. And these private companies have people that are specialists in this kind of activity. And as repulsive as it is, our tax dollars are literally and quite directly going towards this kind of activity. It's no coincidence that it's happening, and it certainly isn't, an isolated pattern or a fluke that occurred because of a couple errant soldiers. And unfortunately, that's the way it's being presented, and it just isn't true. And anybody who knows a little bit about the methods of the American military will know that's the case.
And there's also this, this very simplistic idea that there's black and white. There's the good guys and the enemies. And I think living in North America, and then with these pictures coming in, now we see that we're all, saints, and also, as Noam Chomsky pointed out, gas chamber attendants.
Yeah.
And there is no good guy or bad guy per se in an absolute sense.
I think that's accurate. Although I will say that I think that there are gradations. There are ways of becoming better, and there are ways of becoming worse.
What do you think are those ways?
Huh.
Very realistically, like
basically, if one tries to direct their personal conduct towards doing less harm and more benefit to the people around them, I think that it's possible to make some changes in one's own life. From anything to just being polite to the people around you, to trying to do work in the world that's of some benefit. So, on the other hand, there's ways, for example, working for one of these corporations, I think you're going to end up deteriorating. And I think that there's a certain mindset that goes along with this corporate and military activity, which represents a total deterioration of humanity to begin with before these actions even start occurring, which is this sort of weird pragmatism. And I think if you get enchanted by that, like, well, believing that you can treat people well just isn't realistic, this kind of attitude, then it's easy to start participating in some of these behaviors. And I think it's important to make choices about that. Now, I am not a total pacifist, and I'm not naive. I know that there are, times in life where you're going to participate in conflict and where you might not be, pure or whatever. But I think that we can make choices on a day-to-day basis which lead us away from that.
Do you think sometimes violence is necessary?
Well, I think that there was a story, a Zen story, not to, get overly glib about the Zen stuff, but there's a Zen story where this monk has to do something that breaks one of the precepts, and the Zen master, these stories almost always have a monk and a Zen master, but the Zen master says the key to following the precepts is knowing when to keep them and when to break them. So I think violence is always unfortunate and never good, but I think sometimes it's the right thing to do. However, these cases are very, very limited. That's my attitude towards it.
And to finish it off, what's it all about to you?
For me, it's two things. I'm really into meditation, and I'm really into creating art. And I kind of live in my own little world, and I love to do those two things. And that's it for me. Basically.
To someone who practices meditation, what is it that is really important?
Well, you mean it within the practice or life in general?
Within the practice and life in general.
Well, this might sound superficial, and I don't mean it to, but I think that ultimately what's most important in life is to enjoy it as much as possible, because it's difficult and because people aren't good all the time and things aren't good all the time. So if you can enjoy it, you're doing a great job as a human being. And also, I believe that a person that is truly happy, you have to be happy to be truly capable of being kind. So, to enjoy life is actually just the right thing to do in general. It's not always easy, but if it can be achieved, it's a good thing.
Thank you so much, Jesse.
Thanks a lot. I hope I didn't go off too much. I tend to just start rambling with these.
You're listening to the Roots of Rebellion on CJLO.com. CJLO Community Campus Radio.
That's all right, we're out of here.
Yep, this is the Roots of Rebellion, not the beer clock.
Yeah, right.
That's from the past, this is the present. And we should be having an interview with Prophet Gandhi for you all next week.
That's right.
If everything goes as planned, as it didn't today.
So if we don't get snowed in, go to the Spectrum on Monday and Propagandi.
They're going to rock your world.
Exactly. And you'll get a review of the show on the show right before us on Don't Mess with Dallas. And then if everything goes well, an interview with us.
Yeah, and it should be fantastic.
And that's a Friday worth not missing.
It sure is, Tebow. It sure is. So, everyone have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next week.
All right, take care.